Is that me now? Yes, okay. So this is essentially, this, I was reading this just over the weekend, just in preparation for the talk. So all the motivations and actions, it's a brilliant piece of writing. Practice-based work, all of this stuff is the first thing that you should take out of this seminar, to read that and to read carefully, print out those articles, have them on your desktop. They are so important. The second thing which I want to talk about is something that you may not know about. I bet you're all going to be surprised by this. So someone tell me now in a minute about this. As editors of journals, we have this tool called Transfer Desk. Now, if you submit a journal to, if you submit a paper to a journal and the paper gets rejected, the editors have Transfer Desk. We have Transfer Desk at our disposal, which looks at the paper and it gives us a recommended list of journals where we can transfer their paper to. Now, sometimes I've noticed that in the journals I work with, the editor just rejects the paper and doesn't give this Transfer Desk output to the author. The paper's just rejected and nothing happens. The author doesn't follow up. So please let me emphasize, the second most important thing from this morning is, if you have a paper rejected, ask the editors for the Transfer Desk recommendations, because that gives a really important list of journals that the Springer, Taylor, all of the academic publishers all link into this system, and it gives you a list of journals where your paper might be more suitable. So very important. I mean, actually, no one here knew that existed. I didn't know it existed until recently, actually. Again, it's all linkable. There's a link to this when you have the presentation. So comparisons between prospective journal scope and your manuscript research topic, editorial characteristics of the journal, all of that really cool stuff. So that's a very impressive tool. And I've had situations where I've rejected papers recently, and I've said, try this particular journal, and the author has followed up a month later and said, thank you so much. I submitted to that journal, and now I have a publication. Otherwise, we'd never have happened. So Transfer Desk. Definitely follow up and ask about that. Also, there's a bit on Transfer Desk there, just how it works. So again, editors sometimes don't do this, but they are meant to give you an offer to forward your manuscript through Transfer Desk, and there's a link that's provided in our dashboard of editors. The thing that's really cool, you can see it working actually. It uses AI to analyze the paper. It looks at the key topics, it looks at the quoting, it looks at the research strand, and it gives you back recommendations. So again, I can't recommend this strongly enough. So 2 things so far now. First 2 things we have from this. Read those papers by Robert Davidson and brush up on Transfer Desk, and tell your colleagues about it and leverage it yourself, because this is the difference between a publication and no publication. It's literally a start and stuff. So there are the 2 things to start off with. The key, I was looking for a slide to sort of give the key message out of this. So what do journal editors look for? We're all really busy, right? I'm super busy. I am not going to sit down and look at a paper for an hour. So if you make me work, the chances are I'm not going to be that happy about it. If you make my job easy, then it's much easier for me to push that paper through to the next round of review or to accept it. But if you make it hard, for examples of how you make it hard, incorrect referencing format, word count is too high or too low. Formatting is required for pretty much every journal. If you put it in the incorrect format, I will have a suspicion in the back of my head that you've been rejected from another journal. You haven't bothered reading the requirements of my journal, but you're submitting this and you haven't bothered your formatting or anything. Just put it in. That's not great. So make journal editors' jobs easy. Don't give them stupid reasons to reject things, because you see it. You see things being rejected. One of the editors will get annoyed. I'm not like this, I hope, but I have seen colleagues just get annoyed at stuff. They're saying this is a really good paper, but the person obviously hasn't done their homework. So look, I'm going to kick back. That's not fair. So make their job easy is the key thing. The other thing I would recommend is talk to the journalist. I sometimes, but rarely, get an email from somebody who says, I like the look of that journal. electronic journal of information systems, for example. I have this idea, I have this preliminary paper, I want to publish it. So is this what you're looking for? And I will always take the time to talk back to that person, always. So it's a really, really good idea to find out about who the journal editors are and to talk to them and contact them. One of my PhD students a few years ago in Trinity, actually, she wanted to publish in a journal called AI and Ethics. It's a nice journal, nice mid-ranking journal. And she figured out that two of the editors were actually in Trinity. So she just went, knocked on their door, spoke to both of them for about 2 hours. They gave her incredibly useful advice. Now she has a journal article. She's a third year PhD student with just under 1,000 citations. That's a really, really big deal. And she got that from going seeking out the guys in Southampton. So you mightn't have the opportunity to maybe do that in person, but you absolutely should do it by email or by saying, can we have a quick chat? I'm thinking about doing this. Maybe not everybody will apply, but you might be pleasantly surprised at the amount of people who will reply. So this is what I've been talking about. If you are going to be submitting the work to the journal, make sure you get the basic stuff right. Word count, referencing, formatting, very, 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 very important. The other key things here is clarity and contribution. Now, this is a bit of a tricky one, actually, because if I'm looking at a paper that's been submitted to one of the journals where I'm an editor, I really don't want to have to work very hard to figure out what you're trying to tell me. So if I'm digging in and I still don't know what the contribution is in the middle of the literature review, at that stage I'm getting bored, to be honest with you. But I really need to know what the contribution is in the introduction section. I'm looking for a research question mostly, or I'm looking for a statement that says my contribution is this, as clear as that. So make the contribution really, really clear. The other thing is so basic. I'm looking for a literature review which identifies a gap, a clear gap, and then I want a research question which addresses that gap. Anything less than that, it is not going to get published. So clarity of contribution, make it simple, make it clear. There's a huge move in academic writing these days to make it simple, 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 simple. Cut back complexity, write simply, write plainly, write clearly, and that's the style. The days of fluffy academic showing off your vocabulary kind of writing is dead and gone. You also have to be careful for the alignment with journal readership. Now, basically what this means is, if I get a paper in and it has 0 citations or 0 references to the particular journal, it's getting rejected on the spot. It's not even going to review stage. I'm looking at, if somebody submits a paper to ISJ, for example, I'm looking for a significant amount of references to the journal that they're submitting to. So you have to do that as well. You have to play the game a little bit. It's a little bit, maybe somebody might say distasteful, but it is the game. So you have to do that. And you also have to be aware that you might be actually referencing, that's sort of an underhanded trick. But if you are referencing work by the editors and by the senior editor and by the editor-in-chief, that's never allowed. It's always flat, right? So it still isn't going to be enough to get the paper published. It's a paper, but it helps. And if you put enough of these little margins in, if you get enough of these little margins right down, I think that's a good thing. Theoretical framing is really, really important. What I mean by that is that you really have to be careful about theoretical framing. Now, in information systems, about maybe 3 or 4 years ago, there was an absolute glut of papers and research using actor network theory. So we just said as a journal editor group, we're not accepting any no actor network theory papers. It's been done to death. There's nothing new that really can be contributed. So you have to be careful about that. Be aware of the methodological slant that the paper will have. Both of the journals, in fact, the 3 journals I'm involved with, are very qualitative journals. We don't publish a whole lot of quantitative work. So if quantitative work comes, I'm less likely to be favorable to it. I'm sort of thinking this doesn't quite fit here. It might be a good paper, but not for this journal. So be aware of this, and also be careful to be aware of what kind of thing is in vogue to a certain extent. If something has been done to death, be aware of it and don't do more of it. Push this a little bit. So have a look at what the main authors in the community are writing about. Maybe try to extend that. Maybe try to push it a bit. It's always good to be writing papers, I think, which sort of challenge the rock star professors. So if somebody's wrote a paper saying, I think this methodology does this. If you're writing something which either agrees or disagrees with that, that's very, very publishing. So that's good. Also, clear logical argumentation and structured writing. You can't get away from good writing. That's what we're all striving to do. That's what a PhD gives you, the ability to write really well. So it has to be well written. It has to have it's the Little Red Riding Hood school of writing. It's the fairy tale structure. It has to have a beginning, it has to have a middle, and it has to have an end. If you're telling a kid, your child, a fairy tale, and you start off with, and the big dragon comes out of the cave, and then they all live happily ever after. Well, I forgot to say that there was a prince, and he rode up on this white horse, and the reason he rode was because the princess bit the apple and then she was asleep. The kid isn't going to accept that, right? The kid's not going to want that, because that's all over the place. And you would be really surprised at how many papers are just like that. So you have to have a beginning which begins at the start. There once was a beautiful prince. You have to have a middle. What happened to the princess? And you have to have an end. You know, in the top of the end. It's the simplest thing, but it's a really, really good piece of advice, because even people who you would be very surprised at, sometimes you need to learn that lesson, I think. Common mistakes. I think I've sort of said this, but again, beware of the fit. Most journals will have a sort of a philosophical bias in that they like quant, they may like a particular type of work. They'll definitely have a particular readership. Just the more you go through a job like this, the more you sort of find your plan and find your journals. Like I have a list of maybe about 3 or 4 journals I always try to read, and then it sort of doesn't go too far beyond that these days. So be aware of the journals, be aware of who's writing for them, and just try to join that group. Again, if you could have the world's best paper, but if it's not a fit, if it has the wrong philosophy, or if you're not giving the readership of that particular journal something they're interested in, it ain't getting published. And sometimes then what happens is you think, I've seen this happen a few times, a paper gets rejected and someone just gives, or they just won't bother inviting the paper is dead in the water then. When it's eminently publishable, just in a different place. So be really, really careful about that. I use this tool here. Again, it's linked. Have a look at it. This is the Bible for journals and journal rankings. So sometimes what I'm trying to do is if I have a nice piece of work or something that I think is going to be publishable in a higher ranking journal, I will check this, because the journal rankings change, not frequently, but they do change. And I will always check this. And you can check, again, it's linked in the presentation, but you can check journal ranks, country ranks, and there's also other tools. That's very, very important, and you should definitely be aware of it. So be aware of the key journals, be aware of who edits them, be aware of the fit of your work. You might have to sort of reorient your work slightly. It's difficult to reorient it completely. So if you are immersed in academic theory, then you know that's what you're going to be writing. So you have to be careful to pick a journal that will accept that, as opposed to one that's just sick of it, thinks it's outdated and they've done for it. So that's a very, very, very important tool. Another strategy that I used to use, and I still do, is just take the highest ranking journal I can that I think that I might have success with, and go for that. And if it gets published, happy days. If it doesn't, at least I'll have lots of feedback, and then I'll just drop to the next. And I'll go through that process again, and I'll keep dropping until the thing gets published. At every stage, it'll get better because it'll get more feedback. And it is more work, but it will definitely get published. I've never had failure, complete rejection with that approach. And sometimes you might actually be surprised at how good a journal you can get into. The other thing I want to just link for you, because again, I'm going a little bit fast because I'm just conscious people are leaving. But on the Taylor and Francis site, they have, because again, I just think this is so important. They've listed tools to find the best journal for your research paper. So finding the best journal or finding the most appropriate journal at the most appropriate rank is really, really, really a skill. It's a skill that is very important. So I'm not going to go through this now. It covers a bit of what I've said, and there's maybe a few other bits in there. But please have a look at this when you get your hands on the slides. Get it, have a look at it, and that will be a very, very, very useful tool next time you look. It said a lot of what I've said already, but it is important. There's also one from Taylor and Francis, which again is a guide to choosing the correct journal. So again, it's worth having a look at that. It's worth keeping that tab open, especially if you want to publish, and making sure that you're not making any very basic mistakes. It goes through all sorts of stuff there, which again, more than I can cover this morning in a half an hour, but certainly very, very, very important. So I'll just go on for a few more minutes. So again, common mistakes. I've said a bit of this already. Just weak framing is unforgivable. You can't get around that. If the research gap is unclear, and remember that the literature has to justify the research gap. That's the only reason you do a literature review. It's not dramatic. It's not the only reason, but it's a very, very high percentage of the reason. If you can't identify a research gap by using the literature review, I think you're in big trouble. So identify a research gap, then design a research question which addresses. That's what we're looking for. If you do a superficial literature review, then that's another big problem. So you have to be critical about the work. And the literature review, that's a key word there. The literature review is always a story. It's not a list of literature. And again, I would be telling my PhD students that because they do think it's a list of literature, but you might be very surprised at senior people who think a literature review is just a list of a summary, a list, this person did this, then there's this paper which did this. That's not a literature. A literature review has to be woven into a story. And the key thing is it has to identify a research gap. So this is key. A lot of people think that the literature review is not that important and you can knock it out quickly. The literature review is probably the most important part of the paper, because if you have no research gap, the whole thing falls apart. There's no point in a fancy methodology or super cool data or some fancy kind of analysis. If you haven't got the gap, if you haven't got the question based on the gap, then you're on a loser immediately. Methodological flaws. Again, you have to be methodologically rock solid. If there's an indication that you don't understand the methodology or theory, that's a big, big problem that you can't get over. If you pick a methodology that's, vogue, as I said a few times, it just isn't going to get published. So I would always say, be adventurous with this, propose new methodologies, combine things in ways, it doesn't have to even work. You know, that's part of the research, combine things in ways that haven't been done. Methodology is always a really, really big topic. So you have to get that right. Another one, I've said this, just the fairy tale approach to writing, have a beginning, a middle, and an end. Don't mix them up. And here's a big one. I'm going to give you some examples of it in a second. You have to implement review and feedback. Now, you might disagree with it, which is fine, but you have to respond to that. And you have to respond to that in a particular way. So if you're going to get defensive, I've often said to somebody, you need to do this, this, and this, and they've been highly offended by it. I've had somebody recently who withdrew their paper because I said you need to change this. They were really offended. I don't say anything offensive. That's the kind of paper you don't want if someone's going to withdraw. You have to be open to taking on feedback, and you have to. I'm not saying you have to accept it. You don't. You definitely don't. But you have to engage with it. I'm going to come back to that now in just a second. You have to be familiar with the journal, and as I said, it's really, really important if you have a relationship with the editors. That's vital. We can talk to them. We might never have met them, but certainly I would be talking to somebody if I was doing a paper that I want to publish. And again, play the game. Hold your nose and play the game. Reference heavily from the journal that you're submitting the paper to. It ups your chances. That's probably the most important bit of advice this morning. That ups your chances hugely. You would be very surprised by it. Here's another one, which we could have a whole seminar about, actually. Just be careful to know journal regulations on the use of AI. I know it's a minefield, absolutely. But what I will say to you is that we have some very powerful tools at our disposal that this university and any university could only dream of, actually, to be honest with you, which can detect AI at a level which is sort of shocking. So I'm not saying don't use AI, but what I am saying is be careful about the journal regulations on the use of AI. Like, for example, can you use one of the AI tools to analyze data, or can you refine your writing with that? Sometimes you can, actually. So just be careful to read the journal regulations. And if you're a little bit uncertain of it, just contact the editors and say, look, I'm thinking about doing this. Is that okay, or is that something I shouldn't do? Because there is a decent chance that this will be detected, and that's a big deal because it sort of ruins your reputation a little bit. Yeah, no, I'm just gonna. So I think I've covered most of that. The other thing I will say is keep your eye out for special editions, and you know what? It's not a bad idea to actually propose a special edition yourself. If you have a very unique area, like that one on pedagogical, I'm going to say resilience. So if you have a really specific area like that, you have a journal that you think would be a cool journal publisher, contact the editors and say, I have an idea for a special edition. So build around my work. I can guarantee 5 or 6 papers. I'm going to write the editorial. I'm going to have the first paper. We're going to get a paper. It's more work, and you might have to do some reviewing, some editing. But you know what? They'll have the editorial, and they'll have the paper number one. That's a really cool way to do this. And you will find that journal editors, editor-in-chief, will welcome that with open arms. They will, because it's a no-loss situation for them. You're going to do all the work, they're going to get all the benefit, and it's a win-win. So this is a really, really good one, I think. I'm just going to go on for a few more minutes, then I'm going to stop. Now, I'm going to take a minute to talk about responding to reviewers' comments. You need to have a comprehensive response to every single comment. The reviewers are going to look at that, and they'll just kick it back to you if you don't respond to all the comments. We will not move it forward into the next round of review if there's comments outstanding. It's okay to push back, but have a good reason. Now, here's a response that I did with a recent paper. Now, this is the first page of this. The way I do it is, this is a paper between trailers. So the way we did it was, we usually have, this is just our numbering system. So Richard, the guy called Richard was dealing with these comments. Then we have P 2.1, P is me, and then we had M 3.1, M is Mark. So all of this is the reviewer's comments, and this is our response. Now, every single word that the reviewer said goes into this table. So the first thing is thank you for the opportunity to review that. Okay, thank you. Okay. Something that annoys me, this is something that's so annoying. And one of my PhD students used to do this. I couldn't get it to stop no matter how much I told him. In his response, he would write thank you for your research comments at the start of every single response. That just gets annoying. If there's 50 responses, you don't need to thank the person, just do it at the start and then that's it. So this one here, now I won't read it all down through this, you can have a look at it yourself. But the reviewer had a question. So he was wondering if pragmatism has been combined or considered at the same ontological positions, blah, blah, blah. So that was a question, and he saw that as a flaw of the paper, because this comment ran right down through all of them. He was wondering if we had missed the trick. We hadn't, and we were able to come across that. We actually said we have not come across an explicit consideration of combining these two methodological approaches. So we were responding back saying, we're not saying that there isn't something that exists, and we just don't know that it's a class. So we had to do a little bit of arguing there it's not argument, but you have to do a little bit of pushing back to say, well, look, this is a valuable contribution. This is something we think is sort of cool. This is something that could be beneficial, because he did have significant doubts about the entire premise of the paper. So as long as we were able to justify that, if we hadn't been able to justify that, it would have been very easy for him to just reject the paper. But we spent nearly as much time writing this as we did sections of the paper, actually. But it was well argued, it made sense, and it's worth putting a big effort into that. Another little example of that is here. This again is Richard's work. Yeah, now this is interesting. Look, this is what the reviewer said. The reviewer said, while outlining the proposed methodology, the authors failed. You don't want to see that word, in indicating the explicit contributions of critical realism and pragmatism. So that's a pretty big thing, right? That's the whole paper, in fact. So if we fail to do that, I think we're going to get rejected, right? Because that's a pretty big flaw. Well, we disagree. So we argued back in a very respectful way, but with authority and with passion that we were doing this the right way. We disagreed completely with this. But we didn't just say, we disagree with you, but that's an incredible insult to my character, whatever, it's a rubber drawing here. We didn't do that. We said, well, no, look, this is our thing. This is our position. And if we were to do what you said, this would require a separate paper. It's a different paper you're talking about. What we're doing is this. So we're clarifying. And we ended up actually not changing anything from the original paper. We were able to push that back. So be careful about that, okay? There's one more little example here. And again, this is something that would be a critical flaw from the reviewer's point of view. The argument that methodology and critical realism remains underdeveloped in the recent past. And there are so many papers that are being published to address this. So he's just told us that we failed in the main premise of our work. We failed. And now he's just said that this work that you're doing has been written about extensively, and there's an oversupply of papers that have written just about exactly what you're writing about, and they've done it better than you. That's a pretty big deal, right? But we clarify. We have not sought to argue that blah, 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 but instead we're doing this, and this. So it's clarifying, it's pushing back respectfully, it's saying, we hear you, we absolutely hear you, but we're sort of doing this. And this paper didn't have a third round of review. I think that was the first round, or I think that might have been the second round. It was just published after this. This is all example. So that's a very, very, very good example. This guy here, Richard, is very experienced. He's a senior professor at Manchester. He's a very, very, very smart guy. I'm lucky to be able to jump on his coattails every now and then in the paper. But that's all coming from him. So I would strongly advise that. Okay, I'm nearly finished. So I think I've sort of said that. The other thing I would say is volunteer for review. If there's a journal that you're thinking of publishing in, contact the editors and stick your hand up for reviewing. You're never going to get signed more than 1 or 2 papers a year. There's lots of support with that. You're not going to be dropped in the deep end. And it gives you a certain amount of kudos. So if you are a reviewer, it makes accepting a paper much, much, much easier. And ultimately, when you get good at this, stick your hand up to become an editor. It is a bit more work, it's a bit of a commitment, but it's not that much. It takes me about maybe 3 or 4 hours a month, which I'm happy to put in because the learning from that is essential. You see all of the mistakes, you see how the process works, and you just become better at writing as a result of it. I think I'm nearly done. I might have a few more slides, but probably covered them. Yeah, dealing with rejection. The trickle-down approach that I mentioned was aim high. If you reject it, get the feedback, move on, and just drop and drop and drop and drop, and eventually it will get accepted. And feedback from reviewers is always valuable. So I think that's all I had to say. We're not running off. Absolutely, we're. And there might be a chance now for a bit of discussion if I have a question. So that's my question. Does anyone have any questions or comments based on anything I've said?
PJ, that's hardly told to